Set, start. All skulls on.
Oh ho ho. Welcome to this podcast. My name is Favyn, and joining me is the Act Man.
What's up, everybody? This is the Act Man here, and thanks, Favyn, for that awesome intro.
You're quite welcome. And we also have Raycevick.
I thought it was supposed to be Xperia. You just Xperia. That was your cue.
That was your cue, man.
Oh shit! I was waiting for you. Wait, so am I doing a Canadian voice then?
Yeah.
Am I gonna try and do a Canadian?
Yeah.
Oh
Quickly,
god! Okay.
quickly.
Now, before we lose track of this podcast.
Hey guys, this is Raycevick here.
Oh my god.
What,
That's your normal voice.
did I just? No, that was like me if I like bought a tractor and moved to Texas.
Okay. How the fuck?
Dude,
do you
it's
know
really
Screw
not
this
hard.
Shit, guys.
All right.
Hello, everybody.
You get the point.
Welcome
And
to
we
the
had
fourth
Raycevick was
episode.
gonna do it. It was gonna be great. But anyway, his next video blew it up.
Me and Favyn,
God.
we got our rolls down.
Dude,
just
I
yet.
was cracking up though. I was having trouble. I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get this out. I was having trouble, dude.
He was like, I could just screw it up.
And then his next video was like, I wasn't laughing. I was just, not on top of my shit. There.
I was just trying to formulate a Canadian accent.
It's really not hard. I just default to Mickey Mouse. Just the
How about we
happiest
address
go-lucky
the
accent.
elephant in the room? Why is Xperia here again? I thought he was just going to be a guest.
Whoa!
Well, it turns out there's been a death in the family. Late night gaming. In the last few weeks, wasn't able to make it to this podcast. And so we commemorate his memory to ash. Rest in peace, Late Night. Do you guys have any final words to say about Late Night?
He was very good at making Q&As.
He liked Halo 4.
Oh, well, I'm kind of glad he's got it.
Anyways, back to the topic. All right, guys. So just like the last podcast, I'll say this here now. We have viewer questions that we'll answer in the end of the video. So if you want to ask any questions for us, make sure to post them in the comments below. But the topic for today's video is what makes a good video game sequel.
Whoa, it's almost like we entered an Ackman video there.
It was like
Trying
an
a little bit too hard.
over-dramatized intro of my already over-dramatized intro.
Someone should,
Guys, this is the end.
how do you even parody one of my intros? I don't have an intro.
You don't have an intro.
Yeah, you got nothing.
Just start talking.
Playing this game, and it sucks, and let me tell you why.
Because I hate everything in life.
Well, that was pretty bad. But
Yeah,
anyways,
see, you can't do it.
let's pass the baton to Hidden Xperia. General question, what makes a good video game sequel?
Ooh, okay. So, I believe that video game sequels exist on a sort of continuum, right? So, on the far left, you have change everything from the predecessor, basically make it a new game, just call it something 2. And then on the far right, you have keep everything the same. Don't change anything. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Keep everything pretty similar. Now, games exist like on a varying level on this continuum, but in my opinion, a good sequel, if the predecessor itself was pretty damn good, exists more to the right. So, less is changed, there's just more new stuff added. So, for me, a good sequel is where not much stuff is changed, there's just more good stuff added on top.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I think it was either you or someone else that said it, like, the best video game sequel is the exact same game, just 10% better. Like,
Yeah.
that's all it is.
Yeah,
And that's pretty simple, but what do you think, Ray?
Well, to me, it's funny. I think it depends on the franchise. Like, the main thing, like, I think that we could apply, that principle, previous game, but 10% better. You could apply that to Gears of War. I mean, like, the games, Gears of War 2 and 3, they didn't really drastically change anything from the first. They just made steady improvements. And, of course, depending on who you talk to, there are going to always be people that prefer the first. The thing is, though, when you do that, of course, it's very hard to get a new audience. And if you're a company, obviously you like that because new audience means more money if you can keep the old one as well. So for instance, I'm not really a huge Gears fan, so therefore Gears 2 and 3 didn't really interest me too much because it went, oh, that's just the same game, but yeah, 10% more content or whatever. Yeah, that's not a big deal. Whereas if you have something like, as you say, on the Continuum, there have also been sequels that are able to add those 10% more, that then makes a big difference, or one that's just completely different.
Yeah. Also on that continuum, there's, let's say we have like spiritual successors, which are, kind of outside of that. You've got reboots, like the 2015 Battlefront. That sort of stuff is kind of like spread out. It's kind of like up and down on the spectrum there, I'd see it.
Yeah, it's sort of like a 3D continuum where you have on the x-axis, like, this is too much math for a video, but on the x-axis you have like keeping it the same or changing it, and on the y-axis you have like loads of new content, carry the 1, take the 7, and then at the bottom of it you got like new content at all.
Plug in Y for microtransactions, and there we go.
We have lots of money.
Yeah. What about you, Favyn? Just generally, what makes a good sequel for you?
Well, I think it's interesting, and I do agree with Ray that it depends on the franchise, and I disagree with Xperia on the standpoint that it's always just the game plus 10% better or more or whatever. I think a game, what it should keep what its strengths are, because there's always going to be things to a game that are quintessential and important, and you never want to change those things. But no game's perfect. Every game has something it needs to improve on. And sometimes you almost have to mess up a little bit with a sequel to figure out what was important to begin with. And then it's kind of up to a dev to piece all those things together. So it really it depends on the franchise. It depends on, I don't know. It's tough.
There are cases as well where a sequel, to me, like, I mean, I was trying to think of the example when I said that sometimes a game can be so drastically better than the predecessor while still keeping everything the same. It's just that, like, the example I was truly thinking of was Uncharted 2.
Yeah.
Because, like, I mean, that is it's so similar to the first game in terms of pacing and gameplay design and movement and enemy and all that type of, it's so similar. It's just a lot. It's not just 10% more. It's everything has been refined. Everything's been finely tuned. Its story has been better crafted. It's got more vibrant characters and stuff like that. And just because of that, it was able to have Uncharted just be from this sort of pretty good Tomb Raider style game for the PS3 to an exclusive game that could even sell systems.
So, like, literally a juggernaut in the industry.
The perfect example of, like, the best sequel I can think of is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. Right, because the first Paper Mario, it was like, in Japan, it was called Mario Story. So they kind of went about it, books. They were telling it kind of like a book story, almost like a pop-up book or like a kid's story. The first one was very simple. It was really creative, interesting, fun to play, had great mechanics. And the next one just, like, improved everything, but kept it similar enough that you could have played the first one and just been like, oh, I'm right at home. And I think it's a really funny line because in some cases, like, I think Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is probably like one of the best sequels, and yet you have some people who are like, this game is too similar to the first. So there's kind of like a weird balance where people want things to be similar but better, and some people want them to be a lot different,
You can only experience something for the first time once.
Yeah.
And, like, that's a real issue that, particularly in a franchise that got its stride in that first impression. And I mean, I think most of us got our starts in Halo. Some of us are Halo exclusive YouTubers. And I think that's a franchise that could.
Yeah, one of us is.
That's been really. It's a franchise that's been really struggling with that because Halo 1. One of the things that really was a big thing for its time was the fact that it was this new thing, not just in terms of the world and its mystery and all that type of stuff, but also even just in its style of gameplay. No other SPS felt like Halo at that time. And even for years, games that came after it took a long time to take the good aiming systems and the fluidity and the mechanics of that game to the point now where so many games have taken influence from Halo that for Halo to do something new is really, really tricky in terms of getting that same sense of awe that first one gave you. Because if you separated that, then your core gameplay is completely different. If you keep it, there is no more mystery because we've been playing this series for years, and it's really hard to give that same sense of awe.
That's just it
or exploration
with Halo.
wonder.
Because of the way its gameplay was, it was basically like, we have to make a shooter work on Quake. We have to make a shooter work on consoles. Let's kind of take Quake, a game like that, slow it down a little bit. And what you ended up with is you actually ended up with a game that was really unique. Halo has a very deliberate, distinct pace. No other game really functions like that on a gameplay level. And even if you look at games today, they still don't. Like the harmony of combat, the use of a utility weapon.
The shields and health.
All of these things make a really distinct game. And there's no other game that, they may have improved, aiming and control schemes and, like how good games feel. But as far as replicating that gameplay experience, no other game really does that. And so I think Halo's kind of one of those games where its formula is kind of pretty obvious once you kind of watch some of the people who have really broken it down and said, hey, this is how this game functions. And so that's why someone like me, I look at that and I'm like, that gameplay's unique, that gameplay's good, that gameplay's not even being used right now. I think you could make probably a pretty good game utilizing it. And Halo, I think in terms of what you should change and how you evolve that franchise is also pretty out in the open as well, because you can look how Halo 1, 2, and 3 did. Each got bigger and better than the other, and they usually did that through sandbox elements or through things that you interacted with. So
we talked about in the last podcast about the Turok evolution map, just thinking about like maybe there's some kind of sentinels or those type of unique things. But the tricky thing about Halo is it got to a point where they were like, with Reach, they were like, okay, what can we do now? Well, let's bring back some of our old cut ideas and let's just throw it all in there in one last hurrah and see how people react to it. And then, we were all hoping Halo 4 would come back to, kind of the Halo 3 style and maybe keep some of the sandbox elements like the Falcon or the Revenant from Reach or, stuff like that, and then kind of go back to that. But I think Halo's one of the trickiest franchises to make a good sequel at this moment because it kind of got side-railed,
One of the problems that has been occurring in Halo, actually technically since Halo 3, is that Halo's always had this perfectly formulated combat triangle: nades, melee, and guns. And ever since Halo 3, the devs have been trying to add this fourth layer. And you can argue that every single time they've tried, that fourth layer has been flawed massively. It's been reworked in the following game. It's been removed in the following game. Like, we started off with equipment on Halo 3. Power Drain was overpowered. Flare was useless. Radar was useless. And then Halo Reach, armor abilities were, well, do we need to talk about that?
Yeah, but here's the thing. Let's
rant about armor lock for another 5 hours.
The equipment wasn't the fourth layer, though. Like, people say, oh, well, they did equipment in Halo 3 and no one cares. Like, equipment was a sandbox element. Equipment was something that you went out and you interacted with. And here's the difference. When something went wrong with equipment, which it did, there were things that were useless, there were things that were too powerful, there were things that just didn't work. The thing is with equipment, you could go in and you could say, okay, we're going to remove that. It's gone. The thing with sprint or with armor lock or anything, because that was something that you spawned with, something that was built into your infrastructure, not so much armor lock, but certainly with Halo 5, you have the thrusters and the sprint and all that. If one of those things break your games, that sucks. Change your game. Like, that's your only option.
Yeah.
With equipment.
I'm not saying that they're on the same level at all.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that Halo 3 kind of sort of started it because although it wasn't technically the fourth layer, it was a hint of it. It was another thing on top of weapons, melee, and nades.
Well, but here's the thing: if you could call those things grenades if you wanted to, like you would overflow the grenade slot. But those function as a grenade kind of functions, as in it's something that you throw in addition to your weapons. And I know some of them are even more utilitarian than that. But
a grenade is a very offensive and a very offensive thing, whereas you have things like Bubble Shield that are very defensive, and then you have things like Radar Jammer that I don't fucking know why they exist.
Well, but the thing is, those are still sandbox elements, and for my opinion, sandbox elements, you can do whatever you want with those, because those are something that the developer controls. If they break your experience, you can just remove them without hurting it.
Oh, yeah.
So, to me, if you want to experiment, and if you want to add new things, adding new things to your sandbox is the way to go. Adding new things to your mechanics in terms of Halo specifically, I'd say other games, they can add mechanical things and they'd work fine. But with Halo, because it's balanced on this fulcrum that's so delicate between this arena shooter and more of like a squad-based shooter, if you add anything to its mechanics, you really, really throw off the game. But if you add things to the sandbox, then you truly add things to the game.
Well, this is where we run into the trickiness of Halo, because Halo 4, we talked about this before, where the response from it clearly from the overall fan base was, we don't particularly like this direction that it's going in. It doesn't, whether they loved it or they hated it, they were just
we're
kind of
buy it
indifferent.
anyways.
Yeah, we're gonna buy it as Halo, and we got money to spend. But the thing about it is, like, I mean, for me, because, I mean, I'm a huge Halo fan, and when I went into Halo 4, the thing that I was expecting and the thing that I thought that I got was this company's interpretation of this license. Because I went into it thinking, okay, this is not Bungie, this is an entirely different staff. These are people with clearly very different viewpoints on game design and storytelling and what they're going to do with the character in the universe. And that's what I felt like, I mean, with Halo 4, faults and all in its campaign and stuff like that, I at least felt like I was getting that I was getting someone else's interpretation with this material. That is until Halo 5 came along and they said, oh no, we're not actually confident enough about this license or this direction that we're going. So we're going to keep going here, but we're also going to backpedal on other things. And like the question there is, if you're at that point, if you're a company that clearly does not, either because of disinterest or you just don't have the passion for it, if you don't have the passion to echo Bungie's gameplay design, do you attempt to anyways, or do you just keep doing your own thing and just say screw it regardless? Because I feel like Halo 4 to 6, if it worked as Halo 4 to 6 was just its own thing, and then after that it's whatever happens, I'd be okay with that personally.
Yeah, let me bring up a couple points here, and that's kind of the tricky thing is, also when an IP has a change in who's making it, then the creative vision shifts, and that's kind of what happened to Rare, or when a company changes from within. Rareware that we knew from the N64 Banjo-Tooie days is not the same Rareware that is now. They're not the same company that could potentially make Banjo 3 as I desperately want it to be, right? And
it's why it's silly when people say, oh, Halo would be fun if they just brought Bungie back. Bungie today is not the company that made CE.
Yeah. They all have their own companies
But
now.
to echo something that Raycevick said, he went into Halo 4 with like this mindset that this is a different company and this is their game and they're going to be different.
This will be something new.
But here's the thing, the millions upon millions of people who played Halo, we kind of just assume everybody thinks like we do because we're YouTubers and we're involved in the scene and we try and keep up to date on things. There are tons of people that didn't know that 343 took over. I still see people today that talk like Bungie still makes the games because they just don't pay attention to those things.
Absolutely. No, the mainstream consumer base, the mainstream consumer base is always going to be very different from the enthusiasts, which is why I understand the frustration with Halo 4 and why I understand why some people don't like that game or flat out hate it. I totally get that perspective of like, hey, I went into this expecting Halo and I got something that did not resemble Bungie's work at all.
Yeah, and that's the big problem with Halo 4 is like when a new company takes over a well-established IP with an identity that's recognizable, that people know, that they think of, and they have a very distinct picture of, okay, what is Halo, what is Banjo-Kazooie, what is Paper Mario, what is Knights of the Old Republic. When people have that very good idea of what something is and they're getting something new, they expect at least to be familiar with what is in the game and not just have it be something that feels completely different, looks completely different, sounds completely different. Halo 4 was interesting from the perspective of, okay, this is a brand new take on Halo, but it was almost too much of a, well, it wasn't almost, it was too much of a brand new take on Halo, as opposed to trying to find that middle ground of, okay, we're going to try to replicate the best things that we think Bungie did, and then we're also going to try some new things and see how that kind of goes and how people react to that.
It was probably a mistake. It was probably a mistake to call it Halo 4 because that implies that it's going to be a continuation. Like Halo Reach, probably one of the reasons that people would be more forgiving for changes is the fact that this is not Halo. This is not a successor. This is in part its own standalone product.
And also the fact that in a bunch of like in a bunch of pre-release stuff that I remember a bunch of devs for 343 at the time saying, we really tried to make this a true successor to Halo 3. When
no,
yeah,
it's clearly not.
It really was not.
And there's nothing wrong with it not being a continuation of Halo 3 to me.
Exactly.
It's just that they kept pretending, oh yes, this is, we
really
really want to
feel
stay
like
true
we're
to Halo
making
3.
a sequel to Halo 3. It's like, no, you don't. Then clearly you've never played Halo 3.
You're making
or
your
you
own
don't know.
game.
They clearly took over a franchise, and they had no idea what made it special. And I still don't really think they do. They're kind of getting it. I see inklings of things that they're doing now where I'm like, hey, you know, they're kind of onto it when they do like the custom games browser. It's like, oh, that's a sign that they kind of they're figuring things out.
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah, definitely
good shit.
So it's like, I feel like it's taken them a very long time, but there are signs that they're getting it. I still don't think they understand the gameplay portion of it. You still see even devs and a lot of people doing the whole, well, the game can't be the same thing every year. It's like, okay, well, you can make a new game and add a bunch of cool new stuff without fundamentally altering its formula.
Well, yeah. You look at like Combat Evolved through Halo 3, like, yeah, there were a lot of changes, but the game still played mostly the same. Maybe Combat Evolved being the little on the side one that didn't play as similar, but still, like, they are still very similar games.
And all the tenets were still there for those three games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It retained basically the same mechanics. I mean, obviously BXR and stuff were taken out in Halo 3, but they play very similarly. But they are still entirely new experiences.
I wouldn't necessarily call those mechanics. I also wouldn't call them like quintessential like franchise identifiers. Like, oh yeah, Halo, that's the game with the BXR, right? It's like, no.
No. But yeah. Well, I mean, I'm saying like they obviously that was a key
that's
thing.
That's the
to
game
Halo
with
2.
the teabag, right? You can put your nuts in someone's face
with the aggressive teabagging. But you know what I mean? Like BXR was definitely a key part of Halo 2, whether it was meant to be or not. It was a part of Halo 2. So obviously that was taken out. Just like the teammate spawns from Halo Combat Evolved were taken out, or whatever it was, where you could manipulate spawns.
Now, here's a interesting question that will tie into what we're talking about. It's from a viewer, Deuce Everton. Is it Duce or Deuce?
We're going to call him Deuce.
But anyways, yeah.
Deuce.
He says, hey, Actman, can you talk about Dragon Age series and or BioWare in general in your next podcast? And this is a perfect example because... You know, we got Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, and I didn't play Jade Empire, but Jade Empire looked pretty similar. So you got Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, which were very distinct. Your player doesn't talk, you customize them, you're given these options, right? And then we have Dragon Age Origins, which is a medieval version of Knights of the Old Republic, which I fucking loved, right? And then
it's a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate.
Right. And it's basically like medieval Knights of the Old Republic in terms of gameplay and story, you know, how it's constructed, not overall, right?
Well, that's interesting you say that because it was built to be a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate, and the thing that's funny is that Mass Effect was the one that was meant to be the sort of continuation of KOTOR in terms of its design philosophy.
Funny? Because Mass Effect, you're Shepard, right? Doesn't matter what you do, you're Shepard. You can change how you look, but you're gonna still be Shepard. You're gonna have that voice. Whereas, you know, in Dragon Age, you could be an elf, a dwarf, a human. You could customize your looks, and your character wouldn't speak, right? So you could imagine yourself as that character more. And then Dragon Age had that, but after the success of Mass Effect, I would guess, Dragon Age 2 comes along and switches to the sort of dialogue wheel, you know, cheap imitation Shepard with Hawk. and that was like, I think most people, except for Ray, thought Dragon Age 2 was garbage, and that's like kind of an example of something that's really weird within the company making all these RPGs where they take elements from Mass Effect and put it into a Dragon Age game where it doesn't necessarily need to be like that.
Yeah.
Like, it had no reason to have the dialogue wheel. It had no reason to make you Hawk. Why not just have you be your own character, you know?
No, absolutely. I agree that the problem with Dragon Age is that they tried to sort of, because the thing I liked at that time, and I think what BioWare misunderstood because the success of Dragon Age and Mass Effect 2 were kind of combined because they came out around the same time. Dragon Age came out late 2009, Mass Effect 2 early 2010, and that was BioWare's most successful time in terms of revenue and in terms of critical acclaim.
Well, I thought Mass Effect was 2008.
2007.
Mass Effect 1 was 2007, but Mass Effect 2 was really
gotcha,
the game that set it on the map. Mass Effect 2 is like January 2010. So
okay.
basically 2009. Okay. Yeah, the thing like that was when BioWare had the most successful time, and the thing that was great was that Mass Effect and Dragon Age were very different styles of RPGs. Dragon Age is this 40 to 50 hour sprawling party based really old school style of RPG. Mass Effect is this one that's pushing technology and putting structure into voice acting and characters and all that type of stuff, and action, gameplay, and combat, etc. They're two very different style games. And then what people saw, I guess either the company, this is the other thing too, is it could be either EA or BioWare or both that saw the success of these games and said, okay, let's try to sort of combine the best of both into these. But the thing with Dragon Age 2 is that it was not a very good situation, because Dragon Age 2, EA comes along and says, hey, Dragon Age Origins was a really excellent game that had a lot of praise and a lot of success. Go make a sequel, you got 1 year. And also a lot of the team changed, because a lot of the team was moved to the Old Republic MMO. This is another thing that ties into BioWare's changes.
And that's another thing that ties into the sequels. Like that, the Old Republic, in my eyes, had no real reason to be an MMORPG. Like if it was Knights of the Old Republic 3, it probably would have had at least the same amount of success, if not more so, just because, you know, Knights of the Old Republic 1 is widely considered one of the best games of all time. And when you have that kind of a label behind a brand, to change a sequel so radically, despite KOTOR 2 being as, you know, glitchy and unfinished as it was still a pretty good sequel. Because it was made by
Obsidian.
What's crazy about what we're talking about is we're listing RPGs and we're naming RPG sequels that we feel kind of blew it, right? Like Dragon Age 2, it blew it. Oh, you know, Knights of the Old Republic, they could, or the Old Republic or whatever, they could have done a way better job with that. The thing is with RPGs is because they're so big, and the way they are, they're big, massive single-player adventures. I feel like maybe more than any other genre, those are games that have way more freedom when it comes to building a sequel, right? Like these are games that you can just do whatever you want. Like it's a completely new world every time you make a new one. You look at Elder Scrolls 3 through 4 through 5.
Yeah.
Like they completely change the world. They add new mechanics. They do a bunch of new stuff, and it's okay. Because, you know, it's an Elder Scrolls game. Those are going to be big. It's okay to change.
But they feel similar. Like the Elder Scrolls games, none of them ever felt like it did a Halo 4, where it was like, okay, now you got axes coming out your face or something stupid, you know?
Right, but changing...
And that's the same thing with Super Paper Mario. Like you got Paper Mario 1, great-ass fucking game. Paper Mario 2, Super Paper Mario turned it into like a platforming game, and it was like, as you're saying, the Elder Scrolls games, like you can change the world, you can change, you know, as much as you want, but mechanically speaking, the games should be similar.
Well, no, I feel like it's the opposite of that though, because to me, the thing that those games change, the part of that game that the spirit that you need to keep intact is that sense of exploration. That sense of being who you want to be, kind of like that classless system where you kind of set guidelines at the start, but it's really ambiguous and you can just basically become whatever type of player you want to be. To me, that's the core of Elder Scrolls. Elder Scrolls added, you know, it added stuff like sprint, right? It added stuff like, you know, dual wielding spells and all of these crazy things that the old Elder Scrolls had, because I feel like its mechanics, while they're all similar, they're not as crucial, I would say. Like, you don't have to worry about disrupting competitive balance. You don't have to worry about, you know what I mean?
That's true.
Yeah.
So,
but they're not so far different that you're like, the fuck is this, an Elder Scrolls game?
right.
It's not like in Oblivion, in Skyrim, sprint was like anything crazy like it is in Halo 5. It was like a little speed boost. It wasn't like...
Well, no, the point is just like... adding sprint into an Elder Scrolls game does not have the same effect as adding sprint to a shooter that doesn't have it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, precisely.
Right.
It's a complete... So that's why when people say, oh, you don't like change, it's like, no, I like different change depending on the game. And it's up to the kind of the developer to identify, why do people play our game? What's special? What are the parts that people, you know, want to be improved or don't care if we tinker with here and there? And that's the hardest part when building a sequel, is identifying really all those little things that maybe you don't even notice that are important to your game.
The values,
I mean, we talked about RPGs and we talked about Dragon Age and the Elder Scrolls series. There's a very big difference between BioWare's approach to RPGs in recent years compared to either older games or other stuff like the Elder Scrolls. You can even compare it, like, I mean, okay, you take Grand Theft Auto, Elder Scrolls. They're not remotely similar in terms of the genres or whatever. What they are similar is that their series is not determined by their stories or a continuation.
Yeah.
Each game is its own thing. Yeah. It's in its own city, its own characters, its own thing. Dragon Age and Mass Effect tried to have continuous narratives over multiple games. I know people are going to bring up KOTOR. KOTOR 2 had things to do with the original game. It's still very, very different from the original in terms of, like, it's not... You playing the original gives you ideas and a better understanding of KOTOR 2. It's not absolutely required.
It's like, oh, Karth remembered Revan was a girl. Woohoo! That's awesome.
It's not like KOTOR 1 ends like, oh, you got to play the sequel to find out what happens next. No, KOTOR 2 is its own thing.
Well, and it does really help because, you hear all about Revan and Malik, and you hear about a lot of what took place before, and it's perfect because for new players, you get what happened before, so you don't necessarily have to play the first game, and it's perfect for people who played the first game because they're like, oh yeah, I played through that shit.
But that's
I remember
what I mean. It's like KOTOR 2 is not a sequel in the way Halo 3 is a sequel. It's not like taking place directly where the last one left off immediately after. It's still its own thing. And that's where I think people run, like, I mean, I think a great example of this are the Assassin's Creed games. Assassin's Creed is a franchise that could have very easily have just been a franchise connected by its gameplay and its, I don't want to say ideals because it just sounds melodramatic, but like its design principles. You know what I mean? It's like they could have just been these games where you play as this guy in a time, or this guy or girl, because I don't want to be sexist. You just play as somebody in an ancient time period that we don't get to explore very often that's about confronting their internal demons or whatever the hell. Instead, it tried to be a continuous narrative about ancient aliens or whatever the fuck until it gets that all surrounds this guy who's able to have this ancestry tree to go back in the past. And that's where it starts running into problems, especially after that storyline concludes.
No, I always
also when they release a game every year.
Yeah, I always
that doesn't help things as well.
Tie-in to like the real world. I always found that so annoying. I felt that was almost limiting in a way. You know what I mean? It's just because you have this opportunity where you could just make kick-ass games and just screw Abstergo, screw the Animus. Just like each Assassin's Creed is like this order in a different time period. You know, the connection is the order itself. You don't need the Abstergo.
Or the connection is its gameplay style.
I jumped into
into
Creed a little bit late, and I thought that stuff was so odd. Like, I always assumed from the outside that Creed was a game about this order back in history. When I jumped into it, and I was like, hang on, why am I playing as some scientist jumping through a cave in, like, 2012? Like, it just felt like a weird disconnect. But that was just me, like, some amateur Creed fan coming in at, like, Brotherhood or something.
Well, that's the thing. So like you take a situation though like Dragon Age where they're told, okay, you got to make this sequel to this game in a year with a tiny premise because that's all you have fucking time for. You don't even have time to make different goddamn caves. Jesus Christ.
Oh,
you know
God, the caves,
No, not caves. Cave. There is one. There is one they just use for every quest because that's like apparently how little they had. And I sit there and I go, if Dragon Age didn't need to be this overarching narrative, because like that's all Dragon Age 2 was. Dragon Age 2 was just this thing to fill a gap for 10 years. If it didn't need to do that, if it just was able to be its own thing, it may have been able to do, because the thing that I like about Dragon Age 2 is that it does use its limitations and premises to get some things that are a little bit, if not better, at least more interesting than in Dragon Age 1, like with the villains and some of the premises with its small stories. But it didn't do that. It had to be a sequel. It had to be Dragon Age 2. It had to be the next step, which it can't be. That's an important
point, dude. Because at a certain point, that ties back to Halo 4 as well, and why there wasn't a KOTOR 3, right? Because marketing also plays a huge role in what the names of these games are, right? Yeah. So the Old Republic, they didn't market it as Knights of the Old Republic 3. Right? If they did, we would have all expected, okay, we're going to probably finish the KOTOR story we built up over 2 games, right? Dragon Age 2, because it was the second game, what were they going to call it? Is it just going to be another spin-off? So they kind of had to call it Dragon Age 2.
Dragon Age Dirty Laundry.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. You're just doing fucking laundry.
Guys,
in
I
that
told
game
you,
and
Dragonhawk.
chores.
That's what they should have called.
Dragonhawk.
Dragonhawk.
Yeah. So marketing also plays a role. Were they going to call Halo 4 something else? No, probably not, because
they could have called it Halo Requiem. They could have called it a bunch of cool stuff.
Well,
yeah,
here's
but
the thing.
the pull of Halo 4,
then you've got the business side. Then you got the business side telling you, hey, we're going to get way the fuck more attention. We call this Halo 4 compared to Halo Requiem. People are going to look, what the hell is Halo Requiem? And they say Halo 4. It says to everybody, hey, this is a follow-up to one of your favorite games.
Yeah. This is the follow-up to the game that was your fucking childhood. You're going to buy this and you're going to play it. Halo Requiem does not have the same pull.
And BioWare, as well as Blizzard, kind of avoided that because they didn't call World of Warcraft Warcraft 4. We need fucking Warcraft 4, by the way, side note. But they also didn't call the Old Republic KOTOR 3. So you've got two examples of companies, making decisions on a title based on how they think that'll appeal to people, and, of course, the business side.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting about Halo 4 is, if you want to go back to it, that was an opportunity, kind of what Ray talked about with Elder Scrolls and Grand Theft Auto, where they're sequels, but they're not connected. Halo 4 could have been that game. They could have woken him up whenever they wanted to. He could have, done whatever they wanted him to do after he woke up. They didn't even have to really tie it in. They could have kind of gone in this new direction if they wanted it to, and then still have this Master Chief character for all the marketing and whatever.
Yeah, the problem is they're keeping it grounded.
Yeah.
If Chief had woken up 300 years in the future, that's a bit too far. Everything, when he finds the Infinity, nothing is going to look even remotely
does he
similar
have
to
to
what it
find
used to.
the Infinity? Did they even have to go in that direction, right?
I don't even. There's always got to be some sort of human side to it, and that human side would be so far off in the distance compared to what it was in Halo 3. And you could argue that the Infinity was, and I would say that it was, but having it 300 or whatever years in the future would have been just crazy. They had to keep it grounded.
Well, I think first of all, I think we're going off topic. I don't think they had to do that. Yeah. I don't think going into the future necessarily means that everything has to become futuristic, because Halo was grounded and it was 600 years in the future, right? You can kind of create your own
552 years.
Shut up, you fucking
right.
nerds.
But then you have right. But then you have the Alien series.
Xperia's on my side.
They have
they
have a retro future, right, where it's in the future and they have spaceships and they have all this technology, but some of their technology isn't even as advanced as our own. So I don't really feel like you're constrained to we're going 300 years in the future now. Everything has to look.
Oh no, you're not constrained, but you have to keep it ever so slightly realistic.
Yeah. So if we were to summarize, what makes a good sequel before we move on to viewer questions, I'll give my summary. I think what makes a really good sequel is simply something that builds upon what people like the most from a game. Whether it be the RPG mechanics or the papery feel of Paper Mario, or the characters. Build on that, improve it in ways you can, come up with creative things. And I honestly think it, for the most part, again, depending on the franchise, it really is as simple as make the same game, but 10% better. Of course, different story, different characters, whatever you want to change. But in essence, that's really how I look at it. I could play so many of those goddamn Paper Mario games if they just had that same formula. Banjo-Kazooie games, just the same thing, 10% better. For me, that's what makes a good sequel.
Well, it also depends on how good the original was, because if your original game's shit and nobody even really wanted to see, or if it had a niche following, you're people really dislike these aspects. It's you need to change those things, right? When a game doesn't do something well, and it's a common open consensus that, hey, these things weren't good, then it's not about just doing that game 10% better. It's about making that base game, whatever it was, fundamentally better, not just adding on to it.
That's just a general consensus for me is, when I really like a game, that's pretty much all I'd want from a sequel.
Oh, yeah.
There is one final point I want to make before we move on, because this might drag on a little bit, but bear with me. an issue with sequels is not that so many of them exist. The issue that I'm finding right now is that our new IPs are not truly new IPs. If you look at something like Watch Dogs and what it contributes to the open world genre, not very much. And you compare that to what Assassin's Creed built off of the Prince of Persia games. You know, we went from Prince of Persia to Assassin's Creed, and you look at the differences in what that was able to bring.
A lot.
There is only, I am not seeing that with Order 1886 or Destiny or Watch Dogs or The Division or a lot of these other new IPs. The only new IP that I see has truly done that, make a leap from one to the other, something it built off of, is Titanfall.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Going from Call of Duty to Titanfall. Titanfall took the good elements of the Call of Duty games. Yes, people, they did exist. Shut up. And they went and they built off of that and added new dynamics to a point where, yes, it built off of the previous games, but it's so radically different in terms of what it built off and went in so many new directions that it's basically a new thing.
It is a new
There's one problem. Nobody bought it. And all that says to companies, we don't need to actually make new IPs. We can just take the same thing from before and add a little. Oh, we can bring Ubisoft game X, but now it has hacking. Oh, Ubisoft game Y, but it has co-op, and that's all we can do instead of actually making new IPs. Yeah. So from now on, if there's a new IP that is an actual new IP, not bullshit like Destiny or whatever, where it's just the last game they did before, but X, support it. Support it. Support the fuck out of it. Because if they don't, you're just going to keep getting these sequels that aren't even 10% better. They're just the same thing time and time again.
Maybe even sometimes worse. Like, you look at Dragon Age 2, like, that's worse.
Yeah.
It is
Like,
worse,
they could do anything with an RPG, and instead they went backwards. And also, just I know you want to move on, but I'd be remiss if we didn't bring up...
All right, guys.
No, shut. Okay.
I'd
be remiss if we didn't bring up, Dark Souls. Like, in the past... 6 or 7 years. I don't know if there's any franchise that has like stormed into the forefront of people's mind like Dark Souls has, because it was different, because it tried to do new things. Yeah, it built off
the company's previous work.
Overall.
The Soulsborne series. And the way they do their sequels, like they had Bloodborne and it changed the mechanics, but it wasn't Dark Souls, it was Bloodborne, and people still freaking loved it, right? So the way
arguably people loved it more than
people consider Bloodborne possibly the best out of all of them.
Yeah,
but like
which
to me,
I would disagree with, because you don't get a fucking shield.
Yeah, but that's why they didn't call it. It's like, oh, it's a different kind of game. This is a more active game, right? So instead of calling it Dark Souls Blood or whatever they were going to, like Blood Souls, they just called it Bloodborne. And to me, From Software is at the top of their game. They know exactly what people like about the Dark Souls series. And every time they want to try something, they kind of have this formula where it's almost like they have their own genre that they did because they went out and said, we're going to go do our own thing. And so there's so much value to games doing their own thing. And like, to build off Ray, it's a shame if they look at some of the failures, like unfortunately Titanfall, which doesn't deserve to be a failure, and then go, okay, we're just going to do the same games over and over again. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a game by Ninja Theory called Hellblade that is doing what I hope companies were doing, where it's a developer funding their own project that's small scale, but sort of indie AAA type thing, where it's still a bigger budget than just an indie game project. Mm-hmm. And the more we see of those, I think we're going to get back to what we had in the past, which was a middle market to experiment with new IP in a truly new way that then builds off into truly great sequels in the future.
I feel like we're in a better spot than we were 5 or 6 years ago, for sure. 5 or 6 years ago, it was just all sequels, the same games over and over again.
Oh, yeah.
But right now...
guys, you want Medal of Honor, right? No. Everyone was asking for that.
So I do feel like we're better off right now.
Yeah.
Now we can move on. I feel better now. Dark Souls. Pretty good game.
Right.
Good play.
I didn't cut you off this time.
Yeah.
Oh, but you forgot about me, but... What do I know?
Yeah, this time you get cut off in Xperia.
Yeah.
Now give your 2 cents.
No! What?
Okay, and what can I say? I must have a better opinion than Favyn.
Why don't you just say I agree with everything that Favyn just said, and we'll be on.
Don't you mean Favyn?
Because I don't.
Favyn or Favyn or
Nah, my 2 cents is that if something works, don't change it. If something doesn't work, change it and try and reinvent it. Add a little bit more new stuff that fits in with the predetermined formula. Don't change the way that things look and sound, and you're pretty good.
Do it. It's fine.
Also, voice actors. Quick point, keep the same goddamn voice actors, all right?
Yes. Do not pull a Halo 2 to Halo 3 truth, ever.
Oh,
again.
man.
No, that was awful.
All right. So moving on, we have 3 questions from Don Jones. Because I don't think I asked people to ask questions in the last podcast, or maybe I asked late.
Oh.
He's got one about scuff gaming and physical additions to controllers. What do we think of, those type of additions to controllers for extra buttons? It's kind of a long question, but basically that's the gist of it.
I can't speak from experience because I don't own a Pro controller. I don't have a scuff controller. However, the way I'm hoping, if we're going to get to this point where, let's say hypothetical, like buttons under the controller, that becomes a standard, I hope they get used for more than just as a way to have more options. I like something, for instance, I thought you could use them for is like a dialogue system in real time. And you have the 4 buttons underneath that select that while you still have the rest of your inputs. I'm not sure how well that would work because I haven't seen it or anything. It's just an idea, but like stuff like that. If we're going to have inputs like that, we should be looking at them for gameplay opportunities, not just ways to do the exact same thing we've been doing for 20 years.
That's pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, not making them macros, but making them entirely new buttons.
Yes, exactly.
But they still have like the utility to be macros if you want them.
Of course, yeah.
But then you'd have to completely change like your controller as well, or would it be something like every controller would be sort of an elite controller with those paddles? Let's just say hypothetically, and then for some games you would put them on, and some games you wouldn't. It's kind of. Would you want to micromanage that with all your games?
I'd say rather they just make it the norm to have like 2 or 4 extra buttons at the back, like small ones that you're not going to touch by accident. And make it so games can either use them or not use them.
Oh, he also asks, what do you think of them being necessary to keep up in the competitive aspect of games like Halo 5?
Okay.
And that's a good example because...
So here's the thing. It's interesting because on one hand, I actually really liked Ray's idea, how you can use them to add new options. But at the same time, it's like people want to add a bunch of more buttons to the controller, but I feel like games kind of need a renaissance where we simplify things a little bit more. Because I feel like we're just going off into this endless zone where we're just mechanically always just adding new shit that people can do.
No, man, the PlayStation touchpad revolutionized industry.
Right, and then the gyro steering, you can steer your dragon in what's that fucking shitty ass dragon game called? Lair, yeah.
But even back in like Halo 2 days, I remember my buddy actually like he had Xbox Live and I didn't, and he would play Halo 2 and I'd go over to his house and he had like a controller that he had like cut up with a knife or something. I don't know what he did, but apparently it allowed him to like
was he the original hot knife guy?
Oh my god.
I don't know what it was, but it's that same kind of idea of trying to get an edge over people.
Oh, it's like modern controllers.
I think if these things become the norm and they make it to where, for instance, like what if you had one trigger play, but then on the bottom you macroed it to where it's also like a trigger, so then you can just kind of double tap it. All these controllers with all these buttons, that if you keep adding them, they cause problems. And so what that's going to do is not only is it going to put strain on developers from the standpoint that they have to account for all of these new features that they're trying to add to take advantage of all the buttons, but it's also they have to put, kind of artificial constraints within their game to where you can't just have guns where they function to where as fast as you pull the trigger, you have to like set a deadline to where the fire rate is this max speed. You know what I mean? So It's just, to me, it's more work as a developer. I don't mind them. I think they could have some potential, but I'm worried that if they become the norm, they'll be used in a way that isn't the best possible use for them.
Yeah. Could just result in overcomplication.
Yeah, and also this is a gray area that's almost unescapable. I mean, like I'm back in 2007, I think it was, Prototype Astros got banned on the MLG circuit.
I remember that. Yeah,
because they felt that it gave too many players compared to people not using headphones an advantage. And like, this is something that you're always going to be running into either as a developer or as a tournament runner. That people are always going to be looking for an advantage, and where that line is, that's going to be a case by case.
Get that prescription for Adderall.
Well, I mean, you could say it's an advantage to play with a friend compared to just playing with random people. It's, there's tons of advantages that you can already use. I don't know. I feel like marketing advantages is kind of like this next level that we really don't want to go into. It's not like microtransactions, but when you start selling like, hey, if you buy stuff for your controller, you can be like way better at the game. We definitely don't want it to go.
Yeah,
in
that to be
direction.
the
No, that's
norm. Yeah, because then
imbalanced,
it becomes more, again, a money thing.
The entry door should be the same for everybody at
There
the
you
base
go.
level. Where people go from there, that's up to them. That's their skill level.
So the next question he asks is, how does the group feel about a map voting veto system not being in Halo? I find it pretty disappointing that each game and map is completely random without a choice. I thought everyone felt this way, but after reading the Waypoint forums, I found this was not actually the case. I didn't realize how much MCC actually affected the community's views about Halo, but so many people hated on MCC's voting system. Yeah.
Oh,
what
that's
do we
because it
think
was
of that?
garbage.
Yeah.
I've got 3 words. I've got 3 words. Fuck map voting.
Yep.
What?
I agree.
Screw
Map
fuck
voting
map
locks you into the same
voting.
specific game every time.
It's veto. Veto
I hate
system's
it.
the way to go.
yeah.
But yeah, veto system I think is probably the best compromise because
Because you don't know what's coming next.
Exactly. You can
the
choose to
thing-
not play a map, but you can not specifically choose
Yeah,
one.
and the thing is
Like-
when you have map voting, it's like, oh, is Guardian an option? Well, guess we're playing Guardian. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like Nuketown,
Yeah.
Dust 2
Oh, yeah.
needed to be put into its own fucking playlist because that's all people selected. And like that's the thing that pisses me off about it is that we get games that have all these new like Halo Reach, we got Stockpile, we got Headhunter. Guess what? Those modes are never going to get fucking picked because everyone's just going to pick Slayer because that's what they know and that's what they're going to stick with. Now, a Headhunter was kind of garbage, but I like Stockpile.
Screw that. I like
What?
Headhunter. I like
Whoa,
Headhunter.
Headhunter
I'll
was
defend
a
Reach
good
for a
point.
second. I'll defend Reach for just 1 second. Headhunter was a cool mode. Headhunter was a cool mode. I wouldn't mind to see it come back. It's not a terror. It's a cool idea. You know?
But as long
Fun.
as there's a map voting system, you're never going to get to play Headhunter ever again, even if it did come back.
Oh yeah, I think I
because
played
that's how it is.
Headhunter like I got to play it in the beta. You know?
Yeah.
It's
Same with Stockpile
probably
as well.
a delicate balance of playlists and how
Yeah.
many playlists do you have, what modes and maps do you put in them, what modes and maps do you have in the game, and which ones do you put in matchmaking. The pros of map voting, let's say you got 4 options, I think Reach and MCC were the same thing, where it's 3 options and then like a none of the above. Or no, MCC was just 3.
Yeah.
Right. So the pros of that is like you get to see which maps you get to pick them, obviously, so you can have some sort of say democracy, fellas, in what map you play, right? And I think we all love that moment when we're playing with other people and we're like, oh, pick this fucking map, pick this shit right here, baby.
Veto this shit, man.
Yeah, or that.
Or just like, don't
and
fucking veto it, dude. I'm playing this shit.
I know what you're talking about, dude. When I plug in 4 controllers, it is a dictatorship, man.
Yeah, it's a dictator.
You're the one that
You're the
chooses.
one.
Oh yeah, it is in MCC. In MCC, whoever first player picks that's all 4 votes go to that, which is funny. But benefits of the veto system, I think, are better because, and I read this somewhere. It's like developers see which maps people don't want to play as opposed to which ones they do want to play, right?
Yeah,
so,
that's
so
a
if
great
there's,
point.
So if there's something that people really don't care about or don't want to play, or then that sends a message to the devs like, okay, maybe we should tweak this or maybe we should remove it. And you know, that still has the sort of democracy aspect of it, but it's also not playing Guardian every single game.
Yeah, and I feel like
you know?
map voting, people assume it's just about picking the good choice. Sometimes map voting, they're all good choices, right? Whereas in a veto system, it's like, if it's a good choice, you're probably going to keep it. And if it's a bad choice, then you'll get rid of it. With a map choice,
Swords on Blackout, free for all. Everyone
Oh,
wants
yeah.
to play
Oh,
this.
you can have good choices, but then still just pick, Guardian or Lockout because that's what everybody wants to play, and it doesn't matter if you also like Epitaph or some shit like that.
Snowbound, baby.
Yeah, Snowbound gets vetoed. Snowbound's a map that gets vetoed.
Stupid
Hey,
fucking
veto the shit, man.
Snowbound.
Veto the shit,
Fucking
man.
Snowbound.
Any final thoughts, guys?
Nope.
On map vetoing anything?
I think that.
Fuck map vetoing.
No,
Yeah.
map vetoing's fun.
No.
Rick.
I mean,
Oh,
map
yeah.
veto is good.
Oh, not
Oh,
vetoing.
you
Voting.
trying to
Voting.
Oh, you trying to
voting,
start
voting.
shit, bro? You trying to
Oh, man,
start shit at the end of this podcast?
I'm not controversial. I'm not controversial.
All right.
Yeah, voting sucks. What? I can't even speak. Fuck this.
vetoing.
Next topic.
Veto.
Veto is fine.
I don't think
Voting.
gaming has a misogyny problem.
Oh dear God. Well, next
just
topic.
had to bring
we're
it
gonna
in.
no,
Oh.
we're not gonna talk about it. We're
That's a
moving on.
great title too. Does gaming have a misogyny problem? Bam, bam, bam. Thanks for watching the All Skulls On podcasts, and although late night gaming could not be here today,
Meh.
we will always miss him and hope he comes back. Ashes to ashes, rust to rust.
Something dark side.
Put your questions for the All Skulls On podcast in the comments below. I'll try not to cry. I love you, late night.
Are you gonna also get a shield for that, for your fucking tears?
Peace.
Yeah, later.
Goodbye. Goodbye.